Hi, and welcome to the TechHeart Book Hating Club. From now on, these will be released monthly, as it seems. And today we're going to be looking at Invader Zim Volume 2, because the first one has not come in the mail yet. You might be going, hey, I'm judging you currently as a respectable critic. Why are you reviewing Invader Zim? That's not a thing that a respectable critic would review. And to that I respond, that's fair. I don't really have anything else to review. I thought more people would be willing to send me their books and stuff. So far I've only had one person send their stuff to me to be reviewed. Somebody offered to review my stuff, I'd give it to them in a heartbeat. Now, Volume 2, as I'm pretty sure all the volumes are with Invader Zim, are actually just a collection of issues. It's a non-linear format, which was what the show was. And the first thing I have to say about this comic is that it's not the show, and that's something that was quite the relief to me. Not that the show was bad, it's just that the show would not translate into a comic unaltered very well. They did alter the kind of humor. They even have a lot of delayed gratification humor. With the show, it was typically fast-paced. Here's a joke, here's another joke. And they were just kind of tied together by the plot. In this case, sometimes the plot is the joke. And that's especially this first comic, which I'll talk about in a minute in here, the first issue. I think it's called Zim's Bad Day, I'm not entirely sure. It had a joke that most of it was leading up to that worked rather well, and I actually kind of wish that the comic had ended on it. I will be attempting to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible, especially in this first half during the overview, and with that, let's get into the kind of overview stuff. First, as I was saying earlier about the energy translating, the art style also translates. And I think I talked about this with my last TechHeart Book Hating Club. But when you're doing animation, unless you are doing animation that looks so realistic that you might as well have done it live action, in which case why didn't you do it just in live action, you can't see all the little nuances in people's faces. Which is why cartoon characters, good ones at least, have extremely expressive faces and have very expressive movements, even if that expression is flat. It's why it's a completely different type of acting when you're doing Broadway acting, because people can't see your face, you have to express with your body, versus camera acting, in which people can see your face. And if you move around like you did during a Broadway play, like, people are gonna be like, why are you moving around so much? Just sit still, my dude. You're making it hard for the cameraman and also my eyes. I can't track all that movement, my man. And with cartoons, you need even more movement than a Broadway. And luckily, animation allows us to do whatever the heck we want with body movement. You can jump, you can do backflips, you don't have to hire a stuntman. Although you do have to hire somebody to draw everything. And then comics take it one step further. You can't see all the little nuances on their face unless they just spend an incredible amount of money just having somebody etch it out there, in which case you might as well just take pictures of live action authors, or actors, in which case that would actually seems kind of boring. Kind of takes out the whole point of making a comic. And but you don't have that movement. And because you don't have that movement that you get in a Broadway play or in an animation, you're stuck with still images. And Invader Zim was a cartoon that relied very heavily on expressing through body language, especially Zim, because Zim doesn't even have pupils most of the time. He just has like a mouth and red eyes. So he in particular very much has to express using his body. In the comic, I mean, he has these really powerful poses and stuff, but that's not really enough, it's just not enough movement. So they really stretch the hell out of his face in this comic. It does absolute wonders for establishing mood. Now, to get into the history of the show for a bit, the show was only on air for about a season, and I was pretty young when it was airing. In fact, I didn't even know the show existed until long after it had stopped airing at all. But about midway through its life, the show's life, there was a kid who, like, at the age of 16, bludgeoned somebody to death, and according to the people at the trial, he made the comments in jest, but he did say that one of the reasons, like one of his favorite shows during the trial, he said, was Invader Zim, because of his fascination with gore and body parts, which the show Invader Zim had a surprisingly amount of for a kids show, which was part of why it had such a big following. It was really the only kids show that was doing that kind of stuff. And because of this, shortly, or I guess a long time after, because cartoons take a lot longer to make, so it probably took them quite a while for them to react to this PR accident, the episodes started toning down some of the humor, and toned up how much humor, I suppose, and that the jokes were less impactful, but there was more of them. I think this will go up first, if I'm looking at the schedule correctly. But if I have published my TechHeart reviews for episode 5 through 8 of Camp, and there I say that the show feels depressed because of the oversaturation of mediocre jokes that could have done better if there was just a little more planning, or a different change in energy. That's kind of the way the show started to feel. This is all from speculation, but if I had to, I imagine it has something to do with that kid. Years later, I suppose Nickelodeon lifted the rights, or for whatever reason they were able to make this comic. And the comic, not only is it different from the show just for the sheer fact that it's a comic, but it also feels like they felt like they had more freedom. Normally, this is a bad thing for cartoons and franchises to have freedom, and as silly as that sounds, it's true. I mean, look at Ren and Stimpy. Part of what made the original Ren and Stimpy so hilarious was the fact it was so restrained, yet so out there at the same time, because of TV ratings. You suddenly take away that rating, you give the creator, who was a little off his rocker, a little is an understatement, full freedom of the cartoon. It was terrible. I've not met a single person that liked the adult party cartoon of Ren and Stimpy more than the original. It completely lost the humor that was found in restriction. Invader Zim was another one of those cartoons that was hilarious in that it was so out there, but at the same time so restrained because of TV ratings, which today are actually, I'm supposing, more strict than they were back then, because I really don't think some episodes of Invader Zim could have aired today. And when they do this comics don't really have ratings. You can get away with a lot of stuff. The only rules are put by whoever's publishing it, and I don't know, hold on, let me look up. I think it's Oni Press is who publishes it, and I don't know anything about that company. So their rules are the only rules that Invader Zim has to abide by. And that was something that, like, as I picked up this comic and I was paying $20 for it at a, I'm embarrassed to admit I did buy it at a Hot Topic. It was in Maine though, it's okay if it's in a small town, right? I can go to Hot Topics if it's in a small town. So yeah, I bought it, I spent the $20, and I was thinking, as I was going home, like, it's just gonna be a bunch of gore, there's gonna be no restriction, it's just gonna be everything that, I'm sure, like, I imagine got censored from the original show. And surprisingly, no. It's still pretty restrained. I mean, they're still getting away with a lot more stuff than they could have back as a TV show. But it still has that feeling of refrain, where there's a difference between it being, if you try to do it, if there's no restraint, it becomes gross out humor in a way. But it keeps sort of I won't say witty, but it's not low-hanging fruit either. Well, my phone just went off, I'm not editing that out. It should be worth mentioning, I do have the Hot Topic exclusive version of Volume 2. I think the contents are the same, it's just the extra content that's different, which is okay, because I'm only talking about, really, the main content. And if you're wondering, hey, is this made by the same people? Yes, it is made by a mixture of fans of the show and the original people that worked on it, including the creator, whose name I forgot, and I'm pretty sure, okay, I just found his name, and I can assure you I cannot pronounce it, Jonan Vakes? I'm not sure, and I apologize. But also, you know, in this Hot Topic version, you got like little like meet the creators, and it's fun. There goes my phone again. I should put it on silent, but I refuse. One critique that I have of the Invader Zim comic is that the cover of each issue does not at all match. Well, sometimes does not at all match the contents, and sometimes it does match the contents. For instance, the first issue in here, the cover is Zim, but like his head is exploding in goop, and there's a bunch of little Zims coming out. It just looks like a doodle somebody did, and that ended up the cover. And then, but there's another one in here where like Zim's got like dib in his base, and it's not something that actually happened in the show, or in that volume, sorry, of the image, but it's somewhat similar to what did happen in that issue. Also, there's the occasional thing here and there, and again, I don't have volume 1. They made it a little more clear in volume 1. I did realize as I was rereading this that it doesn't specify, really, that Zim's base is under the toilet. So at the end of like the first issue in here, he goes down the toilet, and if you didn't watch the show, then you would have no idea, unless it's covered in volume 1. If it's covered in volume 1, then that's not a valid criticism. If it's not, then that is very potentially confusing to people that aren't a fan of the show, but might be a fan of the comic, because again, even though they're the same franchise, they are two different things. Alright, time to get in the gritty stuff. And from here on out, there are going to be spoilers if you have not read the Volume 2, which I do recommend if you are into that first half of Season 1 of Invader Zim humor. Especially if you're into it as a kid and you haven't seen it in a few years, because I have not seen that show in probably 7 or 8 years. But I was a fan of it back then. I'm not sure if I would still be a fan of it, but I'm definitely a fan of this comic. I absolutely recommend. You can find it on Amazon, or your local Hot Topic. Probably. At the beginning of some of these volumes, there's a bit with somebody called Recap Kid, who's pretty useless. They just give you a bunch of exposition. But when I say exposition, I mean they give you stuff that you can infer from like the first 2 pages of each volume. And it's like in a really aggressive font. And they're just shouting. It's pretty funny. I'm sorry. And one thing I do have to say... I'm not silencing my phone. One thing I do have to say about the city is that I really liked looking at the background in the original TV show, because a lot of times in the background they'd have just like weird building names and stuff like that. However, like the first page of the first issue, which is Zim's Bad Day, I think that's the name of it, you see the bank and it's kind of a zoomed out city view. They only have 2 visual jokes. One of them is a school bus, but instead of saying school bus, it says school butt. That's SKOOLBUTT, which, okay. And then there's also a building that appears to be, and I can't really tell, the perspective is kind of messing with me. There goes my phone. Stop texting me. It looks like, to be in the shape of like a Chinese takeout bin, but it says tacos. And, I suppose that's supposed to be visual gag, and again, my perspective is messing with me. I can't tell if that's what it's supposed to be doing. And then, it goes into the bank. And, Zim, my girlfriend pointed this out to me. The costume looks somewhat, but not that much, like, Donald Trump, and that it's, a suit of a big white dude in a suit with blonde hair that's like half comb-overed and half not. However, this is also like, it's either just really, I'm silencing my phone after this bit, but right now I'm reading, which could just be just a really default white guy look that they were going for. There goes my phone. But I can definitely see, and it's not like enough of Donald Trump where you can really tell, but it's not enough not like him to completely rule it out. Hey, if you're wondering why my phone was going off so much, there was a glitch in a Discord chat I'm in. It was causing everything to send like 20 times. The first joke of Zim's bad day is Zim walks into an office and immediately a lady's like, yeah, I can help you with your loan. Please have a seat. Zim goes, a seat? And like he's smiling but he's sweating. He's like, seat is something I've trained for weeks and can do most reliably. And you see Gore working the mechanics of the mech suit that he's in. And it shakes and then like just sits down. And he's got a big old smile on his face and does. It's a really good cold opening of sorts. It's not a cold opening because it's a comic and they don't have the intro after this. It's just part of the first part of the comic. It was a really good opening joke, I thought. You know, it's not too stupid. They did put enough panels on it, but it wasn't, you know, a thinker. Not that any of these jokes are thinkers, it is Invader Zim. This is again what I'm saying, like, it's all jokes that are tied in by a common plot. A lot of times when things have a lot of jokes in it, they don't quite tie them together very well. Like, they made the joke, and then they wrote the episode around the jokes. And this one, they wrote the episode and then the jokes came after the episode, which reminds me of another thing, that Invader Zim does well, is that, your world should not serve your plot. Your world should not serve your characters. Your characters and your plot should serve your world. Otherwise, you're gonna have a very inconsistent world. And, Invader Zim, although it takes place primarily on Earth, does have fairly, like, a consistent environment. Humans don't act 100% like humans, but they do act consistently in how much they don't act like humans. There's consistency in, like, who Invader Zim is, where he's from, how they work, stuff like that. And so that's a quick world building tip for you. It's okay if you made, like, your plot and your characters first, just don't force the world to go around them, and make sure you do have the world built before you start making your thing. And then there's, a few more short jokes about the process of getting a loan, which again, nothing like super witty because it is a comic meant for kids, but not low-hanging fruit either. Is that a term? Where did I even hear that? Now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever heard somebody use the term low-hanging fruit to refer to jokes, although I have heard it refer to other things. Hopefully I'm using that term correctly. Either that, or I'm gonna get a ton of just really confused comments. And then, Gore, of course, ruins his plan by accidentally ripping, Zim's suit in half in his quest to get food. And the way that people react to Invader Zim being ripped in half is absolutely just hilarious to me. As I said earlier, the humans don't really act like humans in Invader Zim. If I remember correctly, they didn't quite act like humans in the show either. They're all consistently okay with everything that happens. Like, Invader Zim gets ripped in half, and, they do call an ambulance, but, like, otherwise everybody's just like, this seems pretty normal. And, when they're in an ambulance, one of the paramedics says, we have a severely sick male who was halved and whose legs are still attacking on basic leg instincts of kicking my shins and eating our supplies. So this is just the norm in this world, is the only thing you can really assume, is that, legs just, they get disattached and basic leg instincts are kicking shins and eating supplies. And that's kind of the way that everybody acts about it. Like, Zim runs through a city with his legs detached from him. And everybody's just like, yeah, that's a thing that happens. I mean, they do look at it like it's definitely not something that happens every day, but nobody's going, oh, there's probably an alien or a robot involved somewhere in here. By the way, I'm not going to, do every issue in here as deeply as I'm doing this one. I'm just kind of doing this to kind of set up everything. It's the one issue I had the most to say about. Also, I did just Google low-hanging fruit. I was not entirely correct, but I wasn't entirely wrong in how I was using it either. That's beside the point. The next gag we have in here, and again, these aren't just like one-panel gags, they're pretty long. Zim goes into this like destroyed-looking establishment called, what was it? Sammy's Ribs and Diapers. And when he goes in there, like, everybody looks dead. And when, you know, Zim's like horrified at this sight. Like, just to tell you, this is not a very good restaurant. The cashier just looks kind of dead inside in the back. But everybody else looks literally dead. And Zim asks, like, somebody laying over a table, like, did Gore do all this? And they respond, no, it was the ribyich. And the ribyich, it's an obvious joke on McDonald's McRib. Which, despite this, is probably a comic made for, you know, a fairly young demographic. I don't know. When I worked at McDonald's, I never really saw kids ordering the McRib. The kids typically ordered the exact same thing every time they came in. So did the adults, but the adults also ordered the McRib when it was in. So, it does kind of make me question the demographic a little bit. But this isn't just like, you know, a Family Guy like, haha, McRib, what's up with that, am I right? And then that's the end of the joke. They actually, like, they build a world in which the ribyich has significant bearing. Like everybody says, like, it's summoning not Cthulhu, basically, through, enslaving everybody by eating the ribyich. And, by the way, this is not the plot of this issue. This is something going on in the background that we're not really supposed to pay that much attention to. This is, again, going back to, this is not Earth that is in this comic. This is some other version of Earth, in which, somebody getting halved is somewhat normal, and the McDonald's McRib is just something used to summon Cthulhu. And that's just a casual truth of the world. And, Invader Zim puts himself back together, or the mech suit rather. And Gore has eaten, like, a ton of the ribyches, so he's gigantic. And, because of this, Zim kind of splits most of the way in half again, and Gore just falls out. And Zim, like, looks nervously, because there's the ambulances in there, too. They chased him into this restaurant, and the cashier's looking shocked, and they're all just like, whoa. And the way that Invader Zim plays this off is he kind of, like, nervously laughs, and says, I have given birth! That was the problem all along! This is just what everybody accepts. And then it cuts to, like, a news talking about how somebody had given birth in a, Sammy's Ribs and Diapers. So we can only presume that the ambulance and the cashier were just like, yeah, that's what happens, you know, if you're about to give birth, you lose your legs. And it just really builds this really interesting narrative of what in the world is going on this planet that doesn't really need to be answered. I know I've been saying that for like the past 10 minutes now. And then after, where they're cutting to the news and they're talking about, and they make like a joke about how, Sammy's Ribs and Diapers are considered foreign territory, so they're not sure if, like, the baby at, or Gore, rather, would be considered an American citizen or not. And, in my opinion, this issue should have ended there. Now, there might be some sort of minimum page count. For instance, I know with my publisher, there is a minimum page count, in which, if it had stopped there, it would not have met. Unfortunately, it does continue to go. Zim drags Gore home. The plot is finished. The plot's over. And then there's like several pages of Zim like freaking out as he's looking for his boot. Here's half a page, 1.5 pages, 2.5 pages is how long we spend on Zim freaking out about his boot that Gore had eaten earlier, apparently. And then Gore burps it back up. And then Zim just puts on the boot like nothing happened, and then goes into his, toilet basement. And then there's 2 more panels, even after that, and then, Gore says, my heart stopped working. And that's how they end that comic. To me, once the plot was over, the jokes stopped seeming like they needed to be there. Editing's important. If it doesn't serve anything, you need to take it out. It's something I say quite a bit. I mean, of course there's exceptions. There's the only reason I can think of as to why it had such a good ending if they had just stopped on the page after the news was talking about whether or not a baby born in a Sammy's ribs and diapers should be considered a US citizen. Just these 2 extra pages, the only reason I can think anybody would ever want to leave these in would be for minimum page count reasons. And like looking around, I'm trying to see if there's a spot where they could have added a couple of pages there, and I can't really, it would really ruin the pacing. So if they're going to put it anywhere, at the end of the comic is probably the best place to put it, just because like I can stop reading. Like on my fact, the second time that I read this, or not the second, the third time that I read this issue, I stopped after that page. I only read it twice for leisure, the third time was for this review. Although, like, I'll probably read it again in the future, it's a good comic. Now, as I was saying, I'm not going to go into any of the other comics as deep as I did with that one. There's one in here where, like, a pair of alien type of pants try to rule the world. Like, they can take over the mind of whoever wears them, and so they have, like, a host body to do whatever they need to do. The thing is, my big problem with this one, I didn't really find any of the jokes in them hilarious, but also, the pants for no real reason are, like, super, like, fleshy and veiny, like, just nondescript gore in general is how these pants look. And I'm guessing it's supposed to be, like, some sort of joke, but I just don't see it. Honestly, I think this would have been funnier if they were just jeans, or a pair of cargo shorts or something. They don't have to be this grotesque. Other than that, this was, you know, a pretty good read. I was fairly surprised. I enjoyed reading it. I wish I brought this to read on the plane instead of Moonshine. Which was the one that came out first, actually, if you want to see another TechHeart book hating club. And you want to see something that was negative instead of positive, Moonshine's one for you. Ugh. Don't read Moonshine. Read Invaders Zim Volume 2, but only if you're into that kind of humor. What kind of humor is it? I don't know, actually. I just assume everybody's seen an episode of Invader Zim. Thank you and ciao. Psst. Did you like this podcast? I have another podcast called Coffee and a Story. Coffee and a Story is a semi-linear narrative fantasy podcast. The campaigns do have progression, but they can be watched out of order. Currently, the only episode of Coffee and a Story I have up is called Following the Sun, which is a campaign that follows an elf named Rhett and a Naga named Kali as they chase down a cannibal who is trying to tear apart the city of Elmberg. It's a good podcast. You should listen to it if you're into narrative fantasy. Thank you, and again, ciao.